Ladies and gentlemen, we're moving to a part and segment of the program where there are going to be people sharing their key insights on one particular theme, which is using traditional practices to rethink built environment in a tech-enabled world. We have a very able moderator. Please join me in welcoming him, Bijoy Ramachandran. Bijoy is an architect based in Bangalore, currently a partner at 100 Hands. He has a bachelor's degree in architecture from BMS College, Bangalore University, and a master's degree from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in architecture and urbanism. He is a very renowned speaker, as many of us know, in many fora, regional, national, and international. He serves on the Board of Studies at the Balwant Sheth School of Architecture, Mumbai, and the Board of Reviewers, SEED, Kochi. What I particularly find interesting coming from this same universe is that apart from architecture, he's also made films. And this, two of them, in fact, one on B.V. Doshi, directed by Premjit Ramachandran. The film has been screened nationally and internationally and was an official selection at the Architectural Film Festival, Rotterdam 2009, and the Architect Africa Film Festival, South Africa 2010. Bijoy, welcome to your moderator's seat. And the very first speaker that he will have among the panel is, again, a very well-known Bangalorean, and he founded and leads LVBL Accelerator, a neighborhood improvement company focused on quickening the adoption of sustainable products and services. He has previously founded the electric vehicles-based transportation service, Lithium, the social tech lab, Mapunity, and the development magazine India Together. I don't need to tell you, Ashwin Mahesh, Dr. Ashwin, that is in our midst. Lovely to have you here, Ashwin. Teaches a graduate course based on all these themes at the Kautilya School of Public Policy. He also did a brief stint in government. He's always saying, you know what, I can tell you how to do this. If you know Ashwin, that's him. He did he's advised several initiatives of state and national governments and was awarded the Ashoka Fellowship for Social Entrepreneurship in 2009. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is someone who just briefly made her way on to the stage, an accomplished person in her own right. Besides being a joint managing director at Brigade Group, she has spent the last 14 years of her career overseeing the company's hotel, office, and retail portfolios. Please join me in saying Swagata to Nirupa Shankar. She has a serial entrepreneurial bug in her. That's what is responsible for the things that we see, which is the award-winning F&B outlets such as High, Ultra Lounge, Glass Kitchen and Bar, and the Art Cafe in Bengaluru. She set up Asia's first real estate accelerator, which is called the Brigade Real Estate Accelerator Program, REAP. But what's also, again, a fantastic dimension to Nirupa's side is that she is a runner and not just, she's a sports person. She's a regular speaker, and she has been an iron woman. We know that from her from a recent program that I was also a part of. And Buzzworks, she launched this flexible workspaces brand. So happy to have Nirupa in our midst. We also have another very special guest in our midst. She is someone who challenges the understanding of contemporary architecture as a practicing architect herself, besides being a teacher and researcher. Key to her work is seeking knowledge that is embedded in traditional Indian architecture, which makes her contribution and insights particularly significant for today. Dr. Meghal Arya, welcome to this panel. She holds her postgraduate degree from the Georgia Institute of Technology, Atlanta, and PhD from CEPT, where she's Ahmedabad, where she's a full professor teaching design and history since 2000. Her focus on the relation between water and human-built environment needs a special mention. Spatial Ecology of Water, that's her book which got published. And the architectural practice Arya, Architects of Meghal and Vijay Arya, has repeatedly been awarded. I leave the able moderator to please take on this conversation.
Thank you for the introductions. I think we'll quickly just, so the way we've structured it today is that the three of them are going to speak for exactly 5 minutes each, and I'll keep a very careful watch on the time. And then we'll come to a conversation between the three of them. It's, I think Ashwin goes first, and then Nirupa, and then Meghal.
I'm not an architect, I'm not a builder, I don't know most of the things that are being spoken about this evening, but I do know one thing. I've known Renika for 7 or 8 years now, and since then I've known many others in this room as well. It's nice that you've come together as women in real estate, but you're as good as or much better than most of the men that I've seen in real estate. So in a sense, I've never thought of any of you as women in particular in that sense. It's really nice to be here. I hope I can say something that's useful to you. I don't know if ancient wisdom and modern knowledge are as divergent as we think they are. At the level of principles, a lot of things remain the same over time. And in some ways, when we say we value something and we look back to things that were in the past, well, to me that says, well, we value the same things that they had in the past as well. Maybe not as much. The other thing that I sort of say is that when we look back at things that were so-called valued in the past, it's not clear that the majorities of populations in the past valued those things. We look at things that were done by select people who are well known to us because of what they did. And at some level, I feel that we shouldn't read too much into averages in all of those kinds of things. We're trying to today solve for averages, which is for large numbers of people, millions of people in large cities. We did not have those kinds of situations. Many of the things that we look back to in the past are not really examples of those kinds of things. We have to be a little careful about that. Technology, my only thought about technology is that it is both the creator of the present and the past. 25 years ago, there were things that we began to do with Mosaic and HTML and things like that. Those have now become the technologies of the past. Cycles of technology are also much faster now. In a way, I think we live in a period where technology is creating the present all the time, yes, but technology is also changing so fast that at some level it's creating the past as well. I want to just show you, I don't know if I can get the other presentation up. Shabbat, do you know? There was another presentation. Okay, I'll tell you a story. I don't know if there was another one that I had shared with, anyway, don't worry about that. Some years ago, I had this thought that Karnataka should look like Karnataka, right? Generally, if you look around, you get plunked down in the middle of a city in India, and it's very hard to tell which city it is. And so I said, well, I really don't know much more than that level of describing the problem. So what can I do to make Karnataka look like Karnataka? I have a friend, Ajit Andagre. Many of you know Ajit is a sort of a conservation architect. So the two of us got together and we came up with this project. It was called Kaliloka, right? I mean, at one level, it sort of means learn the world and all of that stuff. But all we were really trying to do was a little project. We got hold of a bunch of architecture students who were interested in conservation architecture. And we essentially said we would do this for every district in Karnataka. We had these students visit about 20 homes, or 20 to 50, somewhere between 20 and 40 homes in each of the districts. Spend a month and a half studying particular elements of built forms in those districts that were representative of whatever historical traditions of construction, vernacular traditions in those districts. And they put all of those things together. And then I went to the various people. I went to architecture colleges. I went to architects' offices. I went to the urban development department. I went to the housing board. I went to various people who are sort of stakeholders in this ecosystem and tried to get elements of these things going in each one of those. And at least in one case, a small project was carried out in Bidar where some of the houses were constructed to include elements of the local traditions from there. I think it's possible in a community like this to put together the necessary pieces for pursuing a goal like that. To say that between all of us, we have various role plays. Some of us are teaching, some of us are practicing, some of us are making choices about what to put in the buildings that we are constructing. And I think it's possible to come together in some such example. And perhaps if we did enough of those in a particular neighborhood, and this is the thing that I'm working on now at Livable, the idea of saying that can we pick in a concentrated area sufficient numbers of examples of this kind of intervention so that you can prove that it can be done. Many of the things that we're trying to sort of intervene in benefit a lot from just being able to prove that it can be done at some small level. And for me, as someone who is not an architect, someone who is not a builder, but is simply interested in the idea of creating local spaces that in some way visually reflect what those places are about, for me, that's the sum and substance of the idea. But I found that in the process of rallying people to support something like that, I've come across many others with the necessary skills to do something like that. And if any of you are interested in working further on this, I'd be happy to work with you as well. Like I said, I'm not an expert in any of these kinds of things, but I believe that I have something to contribute in bringing some of these things together. I look forward to hearing what the other speakers say and to chatting with them.
Thank you, WiREnet, for having me here. I'll get straight to the point. I think growing up, as a typical Bangalorean, nobody likes to see our trees get cut and our lakes get encroached upon. So I remember, my dad being a builder and the first-gen builder of Brigade, he used to take me on all his site visits. And I used to go and see some of these beautiful parcels of land, and I used to be like, are we really going to cut all those trees? And I think from there, and that's why I never aspired to be a builder. I don't think I ever wanted to be a builder because I found the development community very much part of the big problem of what's happening to our city. But very early on, I was guided and told that, Nirupa, just not wanting to be a builder is not going to solve the problem. Development is going to happen whether we like it or not. You can be part of the solution by making sure you build in a responsible manner. And I think that that's what we've been trying to do at Brigade Group. In fact, the last project, actually a recent project that we're doing, it's about a 16-acre project, and it had about 700 trees. And I was wondering what we're going to do with those 700 trees, because you have almost 1.5 million square feet of office space coming up. And Tilak here is the architect for that project. But we managed to save about 650 of those trees by just either transplanting it on the edges of the project or moving it to another project where we could actually use those trees. So I think the main question is, how do we be part of the solution? The development is going to happen whether we like it or not. So I'm going to touch upon just two initiatives that I've been working on along with a company to make sure that development happens in a responsible manner for the city that we love so much. If you could I'll just tell you to move to the next. So just very quickly, if you go back, one of the latest initiative that I've been working on is something, it's a fund. It's to get like-minded people, whether it's builders or large family offices, to come and invest in a fund called the Earth Fund. The purpose of the fund is to invest in tech that will help us build in a more greener and responsible manner. Brigade, as you know, I won't get into what we do. We have been in this business for 37 years and are in all asset classes, be it office, retail, hotels, and malls. But the important part is that I think, as Shilpa was mentioning, we all have to create mixed-use developments because that is the future of our cities, to avoid things like pollution, to avoid things like city congestion on the roads. We believe that mixed-use developments are the way to go, and that's how we've been doing all our projects as much as possible. We believe in creating townships that eventually will be net zero in water discharge and hopefully carbon neutral at some point. Two aspects, we have innovation and building responsibly or being socially responsible as two of our core values. And while I know the building community is a community that everybody loves to hate, there are some people who are trying to make a difference and who are trying to build in a responsible manner, such as many architects as well. And a lot of good sustainable practices are actually being incorporated into our large townships now. Yeah, next slide. So just a quick one. We all know, like the real estate industry, I know I'm actually a champion for the real estate industry, although the slide doesn't say so. But the building and construction industry is actually one of the largest polluting industries in the globe. 39% of all global CO2 emissions come from this real estate industry. It accounts for 30% of energy costs because of whatever the buildings consume. And of course, 20% of all water consumption. That said, real estate is a very important aspect to the entire world because it accounts for about 11% of the globe's GDP. And in India, real estate after agriculture, if you look at all the allied services, is the second largest employer. So from an impact perspective, it has a huge impact on our country and on, I guess, the environment we live in. Yeah. So if you look at population, right, I think all the city issues that we face when we talk about Bangalore, when we talk about all our cities, it's because of the population that we have in our cities. And our top 5 metro cities are more heavily populated than the extremely populated cities that we typically talk about, like a New York or a Tokyo, Hong Kong, London. So we are far more populated than these existing cities. So what are the, yeah, next slide. So the impact of this, right? What is the impact and what are we really talking about as the problems that our cities are facing? One is, of course, limited access to piped water. About 30% of urban households lack access to piped water. 39 out of the 50 most polluted cities in the world are in India. There's untreated sewage of about 62% of India's wastewater is actually untreated. And that's why we had our lakes catching fire because of all the chemical effluents that were being let into them. And of course, you know, waste is going to become an issue. These are all large citywide problems. And we are looking for technologies that will help resolve some of these. And interestingly enough, there is technology to resolve some of these problems. Next. So as I was saying, development is going to happen whether we like it or not. India is the fastest growing economy currently. The real estate market is only going to grow faster from about 13% of India's GDP. Now it's going to hit 17%. And we are going to be $1 trillion. We are going to be a $1 trillion industry by 2030. Yeah, next. Yeah, I'll finish. So what have we been doing? Apart from the fund, we've been working with PropTech startups in the real estate space for the last 7 years. 7 years ago, the word PropTech or technology in the real estate space didn't exist. But we've spoken to more than 3,000 companies in this space. We've accelerated about close to 70 of them, and 45% have actually gone on to raise additional funds. Without us actually looking for it, 30% happen to be in the sustainability space. And what are some of the solutions? So these are some of the solutions that we've mentored. WiREnet is a company that actually has water sensors in to every pipe. So it can actually prevent leakages from happening. It can alert you when there's a leakage in a water pipe. And they've saved more than 5 billion liters of water thus far. Smarter Dharma is like a consulting company for green buildings and help you build in a more responsible, again, build a greener building. Charger is an EV charging station, so that can be retrofitted into parking lots. Clairco is a company that provides clean air as a service. So sometimes the indoor air quality is worse than the outdoor air quality in a closed building where the ventilation isn't very good. And these use very high-end filtration systems to give you very clean air. In fact, they can even filter out COVID particles. LiveSafe is a company that I use at my home. It has patented tech to prevent you from your cell phone towers. And now with 5G and eventually 6G, I think this is becoming very important because constant access to cell phone tower radiation is harming us in a slow and painful way. And there are companies like Structure, which uses green materials, like the agri-waste that they burn in Haryana every year. It can be used as an alternate to your walls and your partitions. Yeah. So one important thing is we don't try to keep all this technology to ourselves. We actually try to take it out to the industry because unless the whole industry adopts it, no change can happen in a big way. Yeah. And yeah, as I said, we are looking to focus on tech, which can work between real estate, sustainability, and technology. Yeah, I think I'm done. You can just end it. Yeah. Thank you. I hope I've, last slide. These are the kind of technologies, actually the next slide. When we're talking about green technology, what do we mean? Could be carbon analytics, water conservation, recycling, waste management. In fact, there is a company called EcoSTP that actually, again, filters out all effluents before we release the water into the lake. So there is actually solutions for all our citywide problems. It's just a matter of finding ways to adopt them. Thank you very much.
We've heard a lot about the tech, we've heard about the sustainability aspects, and I think what caught my attention, and I think that's how Shobha reached out to me, is the very fact that what does this term ancient wisdom mean? I'm here partly to demonstrate what that ancient wisdom was, because very often we only assume that it existed and we assume that it was intuitive. The point is it was highly scientific and it was highly technology driven. Technology suitable for that time, and I believe that it is technology suitable even for today. The focus here, and which was part of my doctoral research, is on the traditional water systems. I come from Ahmedabad, arid. Most of my architectural practice and work has been in Rajasthan, looking at vernacular and traditional systems. So there is a certain affinity to the idea of aridity, which is something we're going to face across the country, across the globe. I mean, last year, Central Europe had drought. So this is something we're going to face, and we're going to have to learn how to live with it. There are three aspects to this. There is policy, where we can intervene, people, civil society, which can intervene, and as professionals in practice, we can intervene. I'm going to focus here right now on practice. Next, please. Here, again, there are 3-4 ways in which I intervene. I wear all these hats at some point or the other. I do conservation work. I do research. I teach. I'm a full professor at CEPT, so it's very important that the younger generation imbibes this as an inherent aspect of what they do. Recently, a friend was teasing me. He says that your studios now have something called Meghalscape, because coming out of Waterscape, and design in the design practice. Next, please. So the conservation, this is the fort at Nagaur, where the entire water system was revived, and they are actually able to use a lot of the water now for the fort itself. Next. In education, design studios which revolve around the idea of understanding water and new interventions within those traditional systems. Next. This is where I'd like to focus on the research part of what I've been doing, which is to look in specific at the city of Jodhpur and its water system. Next, please. Jodhpur had more than 400 water structures in the historic city, more than 400. When I went there the first time, next please, and these are all there. I mean, I have a book out now which will give you all of this in detail. This is almost 7-8 years of research work which I have to capture in 5 minutes. The upper drawing shows 7 or 8 water bodies which were recognized by the citizens. Out of my mapping, I put out 42 of them. What was of particular interest to me was the fact that they were very diverse in their types, which I just showed before. The question is, why so many types, why so many water structures? Next, please. If you look at the topography and you'll see the pattern of the water structures, they're all on higher ground, common sense. But today, when we look at developments, we do not map contours. Somebody once asked me to look at the water supply system of a city, and there were not a single contour line on that drawing. So they're all on the higher ground. They move down as the larger reservoirs collect water and percolates and comes down into the city, extracted by the wells. So the communities do not walk long distances in order to get their water. Next, please. There are also social spaces. It's not that the water is just for consumption. Water is part of everyday life, and I have truly begun to recognize the fact that till we don't make our resources as everyday experiences, we are not going to recognize how valuable they are. In fact, many of these reservoirs had ways in which the people of the society knew precisely how much water was left and how many days they'll be able to use it, and they became frugal out of that knowledge. Next. So this research eventually gave me this kind of information that these water structures that we appreciate just for architecture were actually a water supply system. It was infrastructure that was beautifully made. Next. Bringing that into our practice became one of the most important goals that we developed. Just quickly show you two projects that we did thereafter. One is a large-scale training institution, and the first thing that we did was to map the flow of water. Next, please. And the entire project then developed around how and where the water would be collected, how and where it would flow. It has housing, it has academic blocks, all of that, but all of that, first and foremost determinant, where is the water? Next, please. The other one is a fort on the top, but the precinct is much larger. And the idea is to create a situation where every drop that falls on the ground is harvested, collected, and reused, and used within the system, so that you create a self-sufficiency for water. And yes, so I conclude with that question. Thank you.
I'm thinking maybe, in 2020, Kulas had this exhibition at the Guggenheim, and it was called Countryside, the Future. And, we consider our solutions to be coming from the cities, that the city holds the promise for where we may be headed. And Kulas turns that argument around and says 98% of the world is actually outside of the city, in places in the hinterland, places that Meghal has worked in extensively, that those places are actually cleverly managing a lot of the challenges that come with scarcity of water or climate change, etc. And that maybe we should start looking at the countryside. And then there's also this wonderful book called Low Tech by Julia Watson, which I'm sure you guys know of, which is about indigenous practices and how that may, in fact, influence, contemporary practice. But I had a question. I think maybe it's a conversation that I want to instigate between Meghal and Nirupa specifically, and maybe Ashwin can add to that. And that is a question of scale. So Nirupa's doing these incredibly large projects as part of Brigid. They have incredible densities that you don't normally find in the kinds of projects and places that maybe Meghal is studying for her research. How do you marry this traditional information to help us, in very specific terms, address the challenges that our cities pose? Maybe Meghal, you want to go first.
In fact, this question of scale is something that we've been asking ourselves also, because a lot of solutions that we see don't add up or don't scale up. With respect to water, I think we may not be able to get fully every drop that we need. Our consumption, what used to be 40 liters a day we are consuming, now you have to account for 200 liters. So on the first and foremost side, you're going to have to reduce. But having said that, why is it that we are not able to capture at least what we can, right? I don't think that the attempt here is to scale up to a fully high-density residential unit kind of a situation. But definitely in places where it is possible, as much as is possible, we must do. Otherwise, I think, the very fact that you have hectares of land and you don't map the water. And that's a common sense. Even our cities, even our cities, we always, when we have flooding, we all end up saying, oh, the historic city didn't flood up. Right. But why?
Yeah, but I think what I was trying to point to, maybe Nirupa, specifically to you, is a lot of the solutions that you spoke about. Yeah. Of course, it's important to do all of that, but they seem to be sort of downstream solutions. So if I've got air conditioning in my building, I need to use a certain glass because I need glass, on my buildings, and so I use low-E glass to then counter the fact that I've got glass in the building. The same is, true for some of the other, software things that we're now using as architects. Even we use a lot of these things to sort of, but these are downstream solutions to actually a much more fundamental question about how much do you need? And so that question, are we asking that question of how do we live, how much do we need? And that's a fundamental sort of shift in the way we look at, what does it take to survive, and are we making, not to make a moral judgment of it, how do we address this question of consumption? And it's not technology anymore, it's about,
So I have a contrarian view. I actually think we get enough water for all our needs, whether we try to scale it down or not. If you look at two very different micro markets, like if you look at Devnahalli, which was constantly known for water shortage issues, you had a project where bile came up, and now because they took the basic measures or the traditional measures of just water recharge pits, of harvesting their rainwater, of using wastewater for irrigation purposes, recycling, reusing, they are now water positive. But that is bile. Now, if you go to Whitefield, we have a project there. It's a 3 million square feet of office space. It is completely all glass and everything corporate-y and as modern as you can expect it. But we, again, if the intention is there to actually use or conserve the water that we are anyway getting via just rain, I think we do have enough. So that project, again, has surplus water. We don't take any tanker water. We don't need any additional Kaveri water. We actually don't even charge our clients for the water because we're water surplus. And that's just through all your traditional methods of harvesting the water that you get, using water recharge pits, whatever the wastewater that we're getting, we try to recycle it for whatever irrigation purposes, and I think it's water surplus. I think this concept of we have our stormwater drains, and we have our rainwater, and then we have our sewage treatment drains. And every residential apartment is taught to have your stormwater drains connected to all the water outlets. But eventually what happens is it's done up to the periphery of the residential complex or whatever private complex. The moment it hits the public roads, the rainwater and the sewage water all mix up. So then you really can't use it for different purposes. It again all becomes wastewater. So I think we're just not using the water that we have. We're not conserving the water that we get. And I actually think there's enough water for everybody to go around if we actually just stick to the basics.
Yeah, that's very well put. And really, your commendations to Brigitte particularly. I've seen many of your projects, and I know some of the architects as well who are working on those. There is a real, and I think a lot of developers are now sort of seeing the benefit of making these conscious choices. Ashwin, you spoke a little bit about identity, especially in that wonderful project, and I'm sorry we couldn't show those slides. Is that on the internet? This idea of identity is a kind of important question as well. And you pointed that out, that this question of beauty, that in the way that we address, the crisis that we are facing, that maybe embedded in those solutions is also the notion of identity and beauty, that if you do it in a particular way, that this infrastructure is actually a way to recognize who we are. So the question to you is that, of course, we have traditionally these kinds of buildings. Where do you see this idea of beauty or this idea of identity in that exercise that you're carrying out?
Look, I think it would be difficult to recreate entire buildings in ways that were popular in a vernacular sense in the past. But it's possible to certainly include elements of historical traditions in today's built form. I'm sure you're familiar with these things. But I want to pick up on one or two other things which don't get said often enough in professional conversations. Today we have a situation where 90% of the land is held by 10% of the people. Every solution that you come up with for water, waste, energy, and so on and so forth is in some sense becoming defeated by the fact that it is playing at the margins fundamentally, right? Today, if you don't have 1 crore of rupees, you can't actually have a house in this city. How many people have 1 crore of rupees, right? And what imagination of smart is it to say, well, we're really going to have only owned housing? We've all traveled abroad. Everywhere in any major city around the world, at least 30% of the land is for rental housing. At least 20% of the land is for low-income housing. We don't have those allocations. BDS never made an allocation for rental housing as far as I can tell. None of the other development authorities have done this thing. So we've got a problem in which we're starting with this idea that ownership is the way to imagine the built form itself. But a very large portion of the people are cut out from this way of engaging with the built forms. So that's one problem that we have to think through. And all of us, like somebody said, you can't be picking up the problem at the level of the construction site. Right. You have to pick up this problem long before that. That's one. The second, I agree with what Nirupa said about the resources themselves not being the issue, right? Some years ago, I said, I presented something to the government called One More Kaveri. It's possible to create one more Kaveri without having to build all those pipes because there's enough capacity to harvest and repipe and all of those kinds of things through which you can create the equivalent of what we now get from the Kaveri. Sure. The issue is whether at the granular level we are doing those things in every building. One thing that we have all become used to is that these things must be solved in scale, but not in a messy way. Like, if you say that people in each community should be able to participate in deciding what is a good solution for them, too many people now say, well, yeah, but that would be messy. And because it would be messy, we tend to steer away from that. We look at our own resident associations and say, well, these are bad enough. Now imagine extending this to ward level kind of thing, right? But unfortunately, I think the solution is in that mess. We're trying to go around a problem that we need to go through. And again and again and again, I think that's what we're going to find as the difficulty for all of the questions that arise around the built forms.
Yeah, that's one of the things that they talk about in that book, in the low-tech book, saying that, we're so caught up with the idea of the big vision, the big sort of, fixing the world, civilizing mission of the colonials, that we forget the tactical engagement, this idea of making, and it is messy, it is, many people, many voices, many opinions, and to navigate that becomes a challenge. But I think the first thing that you said, maybe Nirupa, you want to respond to that about access, about ownership, who owns the city, who has access. Do you have an opinion about that?
I mean, I think the problem why nothing gets done is, see, there are a lot of solutions. Like I said, I don't think it's a lack of tech, it's a lack of solutions. All that is there. I think it's just the lack of intention, and it's the different departments owning different aspects. There's no one person who can just come in and say, all of you work together and make it happen. BWSSB is who controls that is different from BBMP, and we need stronger leadership is what I would say. And I think if that will and that intent is there, I don't see the problem. It's just that the will and the intent is missing right now. It's not an issue of capability. It's not an issue of lack of solutions, lack of resources. I don't think any of that is the problem. There's no leadership to drive these kind of projects. It requires dedicated service, tireless effort, will and intention.
Do we have time for some audience questions? Or?
Can I say one other thing, which what I'm sort of trying to experiment with this year. I've been watching this whole IPCC and climate change, alarmism for the last 25 years. And I used to be a student in climatology many years ago when all of this got started. And in 25 years of speaking to ourselves and to others about it, we haven't really made the kind of progress that we need to avert the climate crisis, right? So I think it's worth asking whether expecting people to believe first and then behave accordingly is itself a problem, right? I'll give you a small example. When I used to run the electric taxi fleet, I would find that a lot of the guys who bought the service were buying it because it met their specs for performance and price. But after they bought it, they would go and tell their bosses, I made a green deal. And the boss, being smarter than this guy, would call his boss, and so it would go on up the chain, and until they would actually have a launch ceremony to announce that the whole company was going green, right? And that's all right. I think it's all right for people to buy first and believe later. And I think, and there's an opportunity in that for the real estate sector, because the real estate sector, in some sense, decide what gets built and what goes into the things that get built. If the shop next to your house had only sustainable things, you would still buy some of the stuff from there because it's next to your house. And the decision about what to put next to your house is not made by you. It's made in the built form industry in some way or the other. And I think all of us should apply our minds and ask ourselves, is there a way to solve this from the supply side, which just drives acceleration? And some of the stuff that we are doing, even with Brigade REIT now, is really asking this question of saying, waiting for people to believe and then buy is very slow. Can you make them buy and then believe? And would that be faster?
Yes, go ahead.
I think what Ashwin's saying, and if I go back also to making this connection between tradition and modern, and the case of Jodhpur or any, you know what, the kings of those days, they were kings. Today we have the state governments, they're different authorities. These water structures were built before the settlement happened, right? So you're welcoming the elephant by the trunk, you're inviting it. Right now we are in a situation of chasing the tail because the development has happened. Now we are trying to put into place mechanisms that make it suitable, either basic infrastructure or sustainability or energy conservation, whatever you say, seems to be a post facto thing rather than a pre-planned thing at all scales. At very few situations we have, which we can start for a country of our size, for the kind of work that we're doing, for the volumes that we are dealing with, we can actually count the number of projects that do a pre-planning rather than a post-planning, right? And I think that is where at all scales, all levels and all bodies have to anticipate the growth and have to be able to determine or decide. I know it sounds a little authoritarian at this stage, but in any case, it's going to get done. It might as well be planned better than post. I know there's a planner. He was going to hurt me at night on this, but...
Yeah, I'm really keen that maybe we can open it up to some questions. We have time for 2 questions, apparently. So, yes, we have...
Can we do that at
here, Champak.
Can we do that at home, Champaka?
No.
Thank you very much. I have a comment to share. I fully agree with Nirupa Shankar that there's a gross lack of leadership, and I think that's a political problem. Ashwin's made that point many times in many other panels as well. And we also know that there's, the problem with the political economy, which is basically elite nexus between markets and politicians. And at the heart of whether it's demand or supply, I think it's a problem with the political economy. So I have a question for all real estate colleagues over here on how you plan to deal with manipulative, perverse political economy challenges that face us, because that's where the solution lies.
I think Ram is here from the real estate industry. Ram, you want to take that? Ram is the one who gives all our developers our land, so I think a mic should go to Ram. But I think it's a pretty complex problem. It's not a necessary evil. I just think it's an evil we all have to deal with. It's not necessary, you're right, it's just there. I really don't know how to answer that in terms of a politically correct manner. I'll leave it to Ram.
Maybe you can give us an example where, through something that you did, you were able to change a prevailing situation, some kind of a challenge.
Sure. So I'll tell you one thing that we try to do. Okay, see, as developers, first of all, only 20% of the market is really in the organized space. And as developers, you'll always see, ads saying this park is managed by XYZ, this lake is rejuvenated by ABC. And that's what we do. We have to control the areas in which we work. So as Brigade, like some of the things we've done is we've rejuvenated 16-acre lakes, like lakes that went dry, we've rejuvenated them. Parks that are close to and yes, the lake happens to be close to a project where the view is nice for our future customers, but that's okay. I mean, a nice lake benefits not just the community that we are developing for, but all around. we've planted at least 50,000 trees because, like I said, it's not a pleasant thing to cut any tree, and you try to make up for what all the trees that you're cutting. So as a policy, like we've said, we've already planted 50,000, and that's just going to increase year on year. What we've tried to do is, if we have a large township coming up, we'll try to rejuvenate the parks next door. And that all comes from our CSR fund. So there is some regulation also that is mandated from the government that I think is brilliant. Like I think the 2% spent on CSR is phenomenal because I think it's forcing corporates, to do good. And whatever is good for the country is good for us, and whatever is good for the industry is also good for us. So those are some of the things we are doing as builders. In terms of using renewable energy, that's huge. I think government can also mandate, right? I think there was something that every household should have their solar power panel. Every apartment complex should have a rainwater recharge pit. There is some regulation that is also good. Sometimes, of course, we all face challenges. I know many times we've said, hey, listen, the road approaching, while of course there is some self-interest when we say, okay, hey, can we develop the road approaching this project because there is no road, and that affects the saleability of a particular project. Sometimes you're not given permission to improve a park. Sometimes you're not given permission to improve a road. And we're saying we are going to spend on it. So what is it if the city or the municipalities don't have the funds? We're ready to do it. But sometimes you're just not given permission, no matter what your intentions are. So that's my 2 cents.
So my experience of this is just sort of diving headfirst into a lake that wasn't, right? Some 15 years ago, some of us decided that we would revive Putanelli Lake. And really, a lot of this has come from that. This whole idea of citizens having stewardship of local public spaces. I think it's important. I mean, it's all right to ask companies to help, but companies don't have the necessary agency to demand that the government does its work. Only citizens have that agency. Whether all of them exercise it is a different thing. But I can go to my ward engineer and say, what the hell are you doing? And it's a legitimate question to ask. But if I have a vested interest, if I have a financial interest to protect in that neighborhood, then I'm going to think twice about pushing the system. So I would say there are 2 things to sort of glean from this. One is there's a bit of a schizophrenia going around, right? All of us are thinking that in our personal lives and in our professional lives, you're achieving lots of stuff. And you take the same population and say, why don't you help fix the street in front of your house? And most of those people will say, I can't do that. They don't say, I won't do that, which is a more honest answer. They say, I can't do that. Why would a person who thinks of himself as a super achiever suddenly say, I can't do something, right? It doesn't make any sense. But in some sense, not enough people are engaging with that problem. But equally, I would say developers, or not just developers, corporates should engage with those citizen models which are pushing the state to make changes as well by investing time in it themselves, by investing their efforts themselves, and so on and so forth. Too often, companies are giving, just as we say, government is not the public, civil society is not society. Too often, corporates are engaging with civil society and writing that down as engaging with society. And I think that's not going to work.
Well, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you, Meghal. Thank you, Nirupa. Thank you, Ashwin. And thanks, WiREnet, for inviting us.